Hi, it's a pleasure for us to be here. I'm getting over a bug, so if my voice goes away, he's going to have to take over. As we begin this, it has to do with the broken NEPA process that some of us have to deal with on federal lands. What I can say going through this is that we currently have a group of Forest Service employees who understand ranching now, are working with us, and it's been a blessing. We've also have the blessing of a past Forest Service employee who is an advocate for ranching, and we all in our county look to her, and she has been just a blessing through this whole process. I really prefer to play checkers. It's a little lighter game. I enjoy chess, but when you have to play it every day, it can really give you a headache. So we have to play chess. And even though things are going better now, we still have to go through that process of playing chess to protect ourselves. Multi-layered strategy. I came into this industry 10 years ago, and quite naive, I left the real estate development business in commercial and residential development. I thought I had heard and seen everything, but not quite. I didn't know I'd have to be a politician, a data analysis person, part lawyer, which can be dangerous, and a multitude of other things. I had told him when I retired 6 years ago that I was going to focus on one item and go after it. He laughed at me. So it came to be true. So we attend a lot of legislative sessions. We've cultivated some really meaningful relationships with legislators, with other ranchers. We've gotten together with them. They did a NEPA. They put six ranches together with a culmination of probably 350,000 acres. Although we're similar, each allotment is quite different. So we had to decide that we were going to stand together, started a coalition, and regardless of if something was of benefit to one person but not to the other, we decided to stand together regardless, and it gave us a little more leverage. In checkers, you have little squares. In chess, you have to be far more strategic. Sometimes in your squares, it's people leaving the gates open. He actually had a situation where one of the employees was caught leaving the gate open, which would have left him out of compliance. People who throw the book at you but have never read it, and that happens often. You have some inept, incompetent people that are not personally responsible for their actions, yet we would be. They're the path that has been chosen for us and our resource when we need help. So how do we deal with that when it's so conflicted? So do you play checkers or are you going to play chess? So we had to play chess. I'm going to go over a few items that happened, just some things that were said to us prior to things going well. John had an employee tell you, well, John said to an employee, you know, what you're doing is not legal. And to John, the employee said, yes, but you can't afford to win in court. So that was interesting. My first meeting, John decided I needed to go to a Forest Service meeting. So in my first meeting, we had our new ranger tell the entire group that we had to map out exact monetary figures and make a written commitment in the future for the next 50 years. Well, we'd be dead. So we're committing the next generation to monetary figures when we don't even know what the future of grazing is going to be. At a later date, our consultant had called in We met at the Forest Service. Our consultant had called in 2 senators and a congressional representative, and this was quashed at that meeting, thank heavens. Then John was told that he could only allow cattle to go through a single file through a sand wash, which they considered a riparian area. That was pretty much a directive, but not in writing. That's been quashed. There's no way to stand out there and watch your cattle when they're in that particular pasture. We had the same ranger that wanted us to do the 50-year plan tell us that we need to get a collar that is similar to a GPS shock collar on our lead cow. We run Angus cattle. It's every cow for herself. And what we would do is, it's like a virtual fence, is how it was explained to us, that we could move the lead cow and the rest would follow. What were those collars? About $800 a collar. And then obviously we'd have to invest in some sort of satellite and tracking system. But it's not going to work out there in the high desert on a 9,000 acre pasture we rotate. So that was interesting. We've run into college students out there monitoring or looking for transects, and they've been told to be leery of us. We're pretty friendly people. We'll talk your ear off. And they were told to stay away from the ranchers in the area, to be leery of them. That has since changed, and so that's very positive and productive. Let's see here. I went in with him one day, and during this NEPA process, there's a book, and you have a right to look at all the correspondence. I asked to look at it because I didn't want to listen to what they were talking about. And there was actually an email in there about some things going on, and in writing it said, do not let the ranchers know. Well, during the NEPA process, you're a stakeholder, you have a right to know. And there were a lot of other things that we could go into privately. A neighbor put $150,000 of his own money into a water improvement. It wasn't visible from anything anywhere, but somebody called an extreme environmental group. That ranger that signed off on those improvements told him to remove it immediately or the Forest Service would. And that was also stopped. We found out that it could be stopped by an emergency stay from a federal judge. But why is all this necessary? It's just so cumbersome. Another situation that we curbed is another allotment owner had a historic home on his property. Well, the Forest Service decided, well, we think we might tear that down. So in my industry, I dealt a lot with attorneys, so I called somebody I knew, and they had a bunch of young intern attorneys that were willing to file an ARC on the home immediately. So that was also quashed. Prior to 2000, the ranch was doing its own monitoring because the Forest Service didn't monitor. John, his father, and his family have done rangeland monitoring for years, and it's not only a good gauge for them to be good stewards, but also a protection for the ranch itself. When John took the first group of monitoring and data monitoring, they told him that means nothing to us. And he asked them to put it in his file, and they said, no. You can throw it in the trash can as far as we're concerned. Well, there were two other ranches that did it as well. 3 weeks later, the Forest Service called because they had a threat of a lawsuit and had no monitoring data. So that monitoring data did get in the records and files because it was important to them at that point. John, and this has been a while ago as well, he received a letter from a ranger, Range Con, that if he didn't move the cows, and I'm just going to pick a date, by the 15th of the month, he'd be out of compliance and considered trespass, and she would force him to remove all the livestock. The letter was received 5 days after the date he was told to remove by, And when looking at the postmark, the letter was mailed well after the date stated in the letter. So we have to keep really accurate records, monitor what they're doing as well as them monitoring us. What stopped our last NEPA were a multitude of things. One other item. There were several permittees that met with a ranger. And during that meeting, he actually made the actions. You see, I'm way up here, and you're way down here. If you don't like it, talk to your legislators. And what I don't think he realized is those relationships had been cultivated. There was a meeting the next morning. We had the mayor, the county, who had never been invited in and were stakeholders to this NEPA, 2 senator representatives and a congressional representative. So we were never told again, we're way up here and you're way down there. The last thing on the NEPA, there were several things that stopped it, but there was a situation with the willow flycatcher. The willow flycatcher put a lot of people out of business. And John and I rode down. It was a 2.5-hour ride down. We were in very rough country. 3.5 hour back out. And we took pictures of the habitat, and as we're doing that, some rafters come down. Well, you can hear them 5 minutes away down the river, and they go within 20 feet of the habitat. So each river rafter going down the river is within 20 feet of the habitat during nesting season, which is a take. We talked to the Forest Service. They did not do a NEPA on the rafting, and they just gave them permits to go. But yet cattle can't be 100 yards away watering. So that pretty much quashed that last NEPA, and they said we'd start over, and we're still waiting. I don't do the paperwork, John's family does, but this is how I feel. I have never seen such craziness. It's pretty frustrating. Work together. We've reached out to a lot of different organizations, a lot of different legislators, people on the other side of the fence from us. We read articles that are not organizations we're affiliated with, because you can always glean some information from other people and learn new things and use those resources. Work together, bring everybody in. We did that with the family did that with the Forest Service and a lot of the other ranchers, and now everybody's on the same page. As I said, these people are gone, and it's not easy to have that happen.
NEPA's intent was to declare national policy. Well, you can read it. It gets long and frustrating. To me, I don't think we really require NEPA. The Forest Service decided to do a complete EIS on our allotment, which was started the battle. There's been cattle grazing in that country since the 1880s. We have not changed what we do there. I went in and I told them we have no endangered species. They said, oh yeah, you do. You have the willow flycatcher on the river. I said, I'm fenced off the river. Oh, no, you're not. And I said, oh yeah, I am. You guys built the fence and paid for it. I didn't. So I finally got that cleared up. Then I went in and my range con said, I got to go out and read your Parkers. And I think, does everybody know what a Parker is? It just, they were put in 1963 on the allotments on the Tano, and they're just 3 angle iron stakes out there that they run a tape measure through, and every foot they make a reading. And I told Pam told me I couldn't use names, but I told him, I said, the Parkers aren't any good. Oh yes they are. And I said, no, they're not any good. And he said, I finally said, wait a minute, I'm not saying the protocol behind a Parker is bad. I'm just saying you can't take and use the Parkers in a NEPA, the information. He goes, why not? And I said, because you read them in 1977 because I helped, and now you haven't read them until 2012. I said, your data, it's a straight line. You'll never see a trend or anything like that. Now, we had started reading the range program back in about 2000 when the tonneau completely destocked the tonneau because of a drought. And so with help from our congressional and the Washington office of the Forest Service and Secretary Ray, we came up with this program that the University of Arizona Extension, we had NRCS people, state land people, all come out, set up the protocols, and every year for about, on our allotment, every year for about 6 years, we would send the Forest Service a book about this thick for the year's monitoring data. Real, quite comprehensive. We did soils, everything. And I said, you need just to use the 6 years of data after the droughts. We'll show you the trend, show you everything that's going on. And I finally turned to a rain chart he had in the wall, and it had 100 years of the rain cycle. And I said, Ernie, that chart of your rain cycle will show you more that what happened on the ground than your Parker will. And so I finally showed him. I said, right here we're 800 head, down here at 400. You know, he finally got it. Go ahead.
The intent and purpose of a NEPA is productive and enjoyable harmony between the ranchers, between the public, between the Forest Service, and I think that's a priority. Really, you know, if that's one of the intents, that has to be a priority. Our consultant did this, so there's a lot of data on here. A NEPA can be a good thing if it's necessary, and it can help not only the rancher, but it can help the Forest Service. Scrutinize everything. John got that letter. If they tell you something, find out if it's true. I'm not saying anybody's a liar, but things can be misconstrued. Ensure that it's consistent and current science and research. It's got to be scientifically based. Multiple uses. And the starting point,
before they start a NEPA, they're supposed to inform you like a year in advance. So you can come up with your 10-year plan for all your improvements, infrastructure, rotation schemes, anything. They're supposed to come out to the ranch with you and go through this, get it mapped, and go through the problem on the ground before they ever write the document and put it out for scoping. We finally got that going the other way. Because we were just finding out they were out there starting their NEPA and never even informed us they were coming to the ranch. So the last...
Your stakeholders.
What's that?
The stakeholders.
Oh, the stakeholders weren't even informed. You can get your county supervisors to write a county land use map, a plan for their county. They submit it to the Forest Service, and now they become stakeholders and have to be asked by the Forest Service to attend any action they're doing in the county.
Use the microphone.
So anyway, it's frustrating to have to think ahead, five jumps ahead of them all the time, but sometimes it gets fun. It's easier to work collaborative. That's what our Reading the Range program did, because now the range cons and range staff are out there reading the transects with us, monitoring. We can talk about it. They know we're good managers now and that we're working together. Everything on the tonneau forest right now is slowed down. My neighbor and I, a combined project NEPA on some wells and some water lines on both ranches. it's kind of funny because they called the other day and said, whatever you need to help you through this drought, we're willing to help you. If you need roads fixed or have to haul water. And I'm thinking, well, if you'd finish the NEPA that I asked for, I could drill a well, run the pipeline, and I'd be okay.
And as I said, some of this is just data that you need to know if you have to go into a NEPA. Ask a lot of questions of everybody. That's the only way that we truly learned what was right and what was wrong. Again, our consultant knew what procedures were supposed to be followed and which weren't being followed. You know, ask your what, when, where, why, and always how. This is the reading of the range and what it supplies. What this does is it tells you which pastures were used, the usage, the load, after reading it, and what percentage of the pastures were rested. So if you can see in the yellow, it's hard to see, but 73, 94.55, and that's of the entire ranch. So this is really good data and well worth it if you get into a situation where someone claims that, well, they're overgrazing. We have scientific data right here. So that's helpful. I started doing this because the Forest Service has limited funds and is unable to clean up the land. And I did this quite a few years ago, and I'm about to go back and do it. We can't make new roads or anything of that nature. What I did is I GPSed these sites, and from where you pull off the highway from us to not even 6 miles in, maybe 4, I identified 27 sites. I GPSed the dimensions, I photographed it, and I will go back and do it again, and then I'll do an overlay, because there's probably about twice as many ATV roads now. These some of these campsites are as if they were mechanically compacted, and we don't ever want anybody, an environmental group or anybody else, to ever say that the cattle did it. So it'll be interesting when I go back and do the overlay. Just more data from her. And we're happy to email this to anybody. It's pretty specific. We go from dry like we are now to having a little bit of a snowy winter. This is, like I said, some of it's very, very rough. That's one of our, we have 7 combined children, and that's Molly. And she was riding the river, and that's where I was telling you it was 2.5 miles in and 3 hours out. And Molly's one of the very few girls in the family that gets to go there. She's a pretty good gal. On your checklist, you know, obviously the Endangered Species Act, your Historic Preservation Act, Clean Water, and NEPA regulations. These things right here are very important to read and know if you ever go into a NEPA process. Everything's undergoing change, the way we treat our forests, the way the public wants it managed. So it's becoming more user-specific, so we have to be sensitive to that. You know, our human interactions and environmental actions have to change a little. And that's branding. And it mandates federal land managers to collaborate with the private sector, and that's where we had our struggle. But as I had mentioned earlier, we are very productive with them right now, and it was a long, challenging road, but we're happy now. John put these up, and only a couple of them got shot. Thank you.
Any questions? No way, Reed, really?
How did you find your consultant?
She was a range con on the Tono National. She was a range con on the Tono National Forest, and we're all kind of one big happy family on that forest. She was riding with Mick Holder down on Roosevelt Lake and had a horse buck her off and break her hip, so she had to retire. And she had called me and said, "Can I come out? I want to do some of my own." She's compiling a book. So her and her husband came out, and we took them up and showed them around, and she set up some transect test areas. And I got to telling her what we had been through on the Globe District, and that kind of got her going. And now everybody on the Tono uses her as a consultant. And she beats them when she walks through the door. They hate to see her coming because she used to be the one that wrote the NEPA, the lead NEPA. And what's happened, we have so many new people, we don't have anybody on the forest right now really qualified to write a NEPA. So I was joking about that, let me drill the well. That's already been sent out for scoping. But the ARC guys don't have the time to write their last report to allow us to start. They're so tied up because, well, I'm 30 years in waiting on a NEPA for the ranch right now. The first time, what's that, I gotta go? Well, the first time I stopped it with, "I'm gonna sue your ass," and the guys called everybody, "Never mind, we gotta go," and I never heard about it again for another 5-10 years. The last one where they combined all 6, doing the complete EIS, I asked them if they had a NEPA on the river runners. They said, "No, we just give a permit." And I said, "No, it's paid permitted activity, just like grazing is, therefore it requires a NEPA." Well, anyway, we kept bringing that up to him, and my neighbor, we had the forest supervisor in the truck taking him where he could actually drive to his part of the river where there was some habitat. And he said, "By the way, the first boat down the river this year, I'm going to sue your ass." And the forest supervisor said, "What's that going to gain you?" And he said, "Nothing, but we're going to play fair." So those kind of got out. Now we work collaborative. Thank you, sir.